this week on Startup Security Weekly. It's episode number 55. And as you can tell, it's Michael Paul's out today. Matt Alderman's joining me. We've got Jason Brvenik. We're going to talk about the dogma of the industry, along with some other things. Startup articles, we're going to talk about startup advisors, mentors, things you need to do to grow your startup. We haven't talked about elevator pitch in a while, but don't worry, we're bringing it back today. And we're going to talk about AppGuard, Cache Shield, Securonics, and a couple updates as we go through episode 55.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Startup Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by... Are you looking for a career where you can make a real difference? Accenture Security is looking for passionate, creative minds to tackle some of the biggest security threats facing us today. Innovative thinkers who want to outmaneuver cybercriminals. They're hiring specialists across the spectrum, from security strategy to cyber defense, digital identity, and application security, helping to deliver holistic solutions. If you want to use next-generation technologies and global resources to change the future of security, visit accenture.com/security careers. Make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV's courses live and on demand worldwide, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Their team solution provides access to a supervisor portal for full control over your team's training schedule and group analytics. Go to itpro.tv/startup security and use the code SS30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. To learn more about IT Pro TV's team solution, sign up for a free demo of their supervisor portal.
It's going to be an exciting week because Matt is in the house. It's kind of funny, like when you turn it over to the beach bum. Like, I'm so used to Paul being there saying, hey, it's the beach bum, but the beach bum is here. So I guess it's like the bald, beautiful men taking over, talking about value today is how it's going to be. So, Matt, thanks for making time. It's always fun when you're here. So I think today will be no exception. How are things in your neck of the woods?
Beautiful, clear day in Mile High. So, yeah, this is my second this week. I had to fill in for John earlier in the week. So I love doing these double duties during the week.
We got to get like badges, right? Like we should start having badges and kind of fill them out. We got to get with Doug White, and we need to go on his program, and we need to have him back on this one more often. But that'll be good. Well, so I got two quick reads. Let me go through those here real quick. One of the great opportunities, go to itpro.tv, startup security. So itpro.tv/startup security. Use the code SS30. Try it free for 7 days. Receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. I love that model. I love how they do it. To learn more about IT Pro TV's team solution, sign up for a free demo of their supervisor portal. And SANS Hackfest, November 13th to 20th, Bethesda, Maryland. It's going to be in the Washington, D.C. area. That's where Bethesda is. Hackfest is SANS' most offensive-focused training event of the year. It includes a 2-day summit, 3 nights of net wars with Coinapalooza, 1 night of Cyber City missions, and a super secret challenge, all alongside 9 courses taught by their top pen test course authors and instructors. This is not going to be a good day for talking. The Hackfest Summit is November 13th and 14th. It's 2 days of informative and technical talks curated by SANS fellow and friend of the podcast at Scoutus. Oh, man. All right. I'm blowing it today. Paul is going to present when he's there, and I'm betting he's going to do a better job of presenting than I am doing reading this right now. How to defend against penetration testers and win. It's always about winning with Paul. So if you want to win, you should go check that out. Register at sans.org/hackfest17. Security Weekly listeners save $300 off the 2-day Hackfest Summit by using the discount code Hackfest17 at registration. All right, our guest this week is Jason Brvenik from NSS Labs. It's one of these guys like us. He's been doing it for 20 years. He's been around a lot of the different stuff. And when he and I got introduced and started talking, we kind of had that chance to look at the industry a little bit and say, how are things going? Like, what can we do better? And not necessarily looking at it just to be curmudgeonly, but instead looked at it as a sense of, what have we done that maybe worked but isn't helping us anymore, and we need to let go of it? Where do we go from here? What actually makes a difference? And I think it kind of fits into the broader thing that a lot of us are talking about with how do we elevate this industry? Where do we go? How do we get better at it? And so Jason is here today. He's going to talk with Matt and I about this and a number of other things. Jason, welcome to Startup Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me.
It is exciting. So tell us, so you're at NSS Labs now. What's I mean, you said, you're a typical, simple, critical thinking, average kind of person. So none of those fit in terms of typical. But what was your path to NSS, and how are you liking it now that you're there?
Oh, my path. I've been in this space for a while. I did a lot of network security for 15 years. Was looking for a new challenge and an opportunity to have a better impact on the state of cyber. We see breaches every day. And it's not because people haven't spent plenty of money on technologies. So there must be some gap somewhere. And let's go bring some truth to that and try and close that a little. And that's how I ended up here.
Yeah, I like that. And that's one of the things you and I were talking about offline, and Matt and I spend a lot of time, we look at value. And one of the questions I've started asking a lot of security leaders in their situations is, what do you have that's working? Like when we've looked at this list of things, and there's certain technologies that we have, and sometimes if you say to somebody, why do you have it, they look at you kind of funny, cock their head and say, well, because I'm in security and I'm supposed to. And so if we then say, well, what's working? Like, did you measure it? Right? Do you have a scorecard? Do you have a report card? If somebody asked you, if you had a zero-based budget, could you tell me what was paying off for you and what wasn't? A lot of people then look at you kind of funny and say, security. I can't do any of that. So, Jason, how do we start tackling that differently?
That's an interesting question. If you think about effective security, nobody would ever see it. It wouldn't be something we talked about. It wouldn't be something we had to worry about. It just worked, and nobody ever got compromised, and things moved on. And so your visible value would be zero because there'd be no compromise to respond to, although the actual value would be pretty great. I tell you, it's a non-trivial problem to solve in measuring value. There's a number of ways we've attempted to do it. The root for me is all technologies are not equal. Each one has different differentiations and different operational models and different fits. And we attempt at least to assess against the known state of the industry, an even playing field comparison of all the technologies. But I'll tell you the real measure for me is that we never hear about security again. It's built into the programs. It's built into the systems. People don't worry about it. It doesn't get in the way of their job. And they don't have to worry about their identities being stolen.
So Jason, that brings up a very interesting question, right? If you think about where network security into enterprise security has kind of transitioned over the years, is we've always kind of bolted or layered on security around technology. And you just made a statement that I don't think many people are thinking about, which is, how do you embed it into these applications and into the systems and just make it default part of the technology? And I just don't see us there yet. And so I'm curious, how do we get there? Does anybody have that vision of trying to think about security from the inside out instead of always the outside in?
I think it was as a result of the slapshot we did, where there was a Twitter conversation, and one of the statements was that we need more cyber programs and more cyber experts, and we need to create training and systems where people can specialize. And my view is we need to eliminate it as an entirely separate discipline, and we need to build them into the existing ones. Cybersecurity exists because of the failings of the other disciplines. If everything worked as designed, we wouldn't be here.
So does that mean, so let me play this out a second, because I think this is really interesting, because this is part of my philosophy. IT has failed to secure infrastructure. Development pretty much has failed at securing applications. Does security become embedded into this new wave of DevOps who's going to start to own the infrastructure and the application? Does it really have to get buried there as we think about the technology trends that are driving us to the cloud and to containerization and microservices and all this, whiz bang trendy stuff. Is that where it goes? Does security really become just a part of the DevOps team?
I don't know if it becomes a part of the DevOps team. Certainly, systems are engineered well before they get deployed and into the hands of DevOps. And we have an incredible amount of technical debt out there today from the technologies we built in the past. There's going to be a long transition between new, more securely designed systems and what we have in place today, and the cost to deliver on assured computing and to ensure that it's secure by design is incongruent with what people are willing to pay for the technologies they're consuming. So I'm not so sure that we're going to eliminate it anytime soon. There's going to be much more toolkits and assembly of various components before we start to see demonstrable progress there. And at the end, it's going to be, I think, very much like criminals. We haven't eliminated criminals in society. I doubt we're going to eliminate vulnerabilities or breaches. What we should be focusing on is catching them soon, often, every time they appear, and convicting them as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
A lot of times when we do stuff like this, I'm a big fan of looking for analogs. Now, there's a danger in that, by the way. Sometimes the analogs we pick just don't work. Like we either oversimplify. It's kind of like everybody saying, "Oh, it should be like the brakes on a car." Yeah, no, I don't know. No, just go ahead and stop. But what I always look at is, okay, well, how does this exist in other places? Like, it's where does security fit? And one of the things I think is interesting, and I'm not necessarily using this as an analog yet, but if you follow the insurance marketplace and you look at the way that they're handling what they just traditionally call cyber, which confounds some people because it's more than just security. Like we hear cyber and we go, oh, you mean security? No, they mean cyber, pretty much anything that's online, unless they mean spider, which, sometimes cyber, spider, they sound alike. But they're starting to look at cyber as just, it's another peril. It's another risk to consider. It's another thing to stick into the basket of risks. And I think that that's actually at least congruent with some of these other discussions to say, wait a minute, is it its own special field, its own special thing, or does it fit into everything that's broader? Because, Matt, to your point, like, does it mean it's just part of DevOps? My initial instinct was yes, no. Like, yeah, sure, it's part of DevOps, and it's also going to be part of, general procurement and risk management. It's also going to be part of frontline customer-facing parts of the application. It's also, or your system or everything else. Like, yeah, and then what's funny is what I'm hearing in my head is the stuff that we've been saying for 20 years. Security is everybody's responsibility. Everybody's responsible for it. We've got to build it in. We can't bake it, bolt it on later. And so I think it's kind of interesting. Let me go back to then, how do we start to get our heads wrapped around what's actually valuable and what we need to do more of, and maybe some of the things that we should be letting go of?
Who are you asking that one of? I've got a long laundry list.
I made it
I've got a short list.
All right, we'll let Matt go first. Short list, and then Jason will kick it back to you.
Yeah, so my list is very focused from the business side, right? The reason we're adopting these trends and we're doing the things we're doing is because business is trying to, compete, grow, and go in the economy. And look, they're looking for things like agility, flexibility, and portability because they want to move as fast as they can. And if we don't think about that from a security perspective of how we can continue to help them be an agile, flexible, kind of portable business to grow, then I think we're missing the boat from why we're even doing any of this in the first place. That's just my take, because I think, look, the business has got to minimize potential risks to go reap the rewards of being in business. And if we can't help them do that, we're done.
I'd agree completely there, actually. One of the cases that I like to talk about is cloud computing. When cloud computing first emerged, security, we can't do that. It's insecure. We don't know how. We don't know the risks. And our job in security is not to say the business can or can't do something. Our job in security is to make sure that they can move as quickly as possible while minimizing the risk they're exposed to. And we should do that fervently in everything we touch, but understanding and expressing what the true risk is. So when cloud computing came about, my statement was, well, what you should do then is look and see where the best, most secure systems are and define a standard that is workable and deployable that meets the business need for operational efficiency and hyperscale and all that other stuff. And we're a decade later, and I still don't think we've achieved that. We've made things worse, as evidenced by recent breaches. However, we've also made them cheaper, and so maybe it's a trade-off that people are willing to make.
How do we start to measure that risk?
Got to enable the business.
Yeah, like how yeah, it's almost the same question, right? Like, how do we? Because one of the things that I keep coming back to is like I like the word protection. All right, so what is it that we need to protect? If we're going to move at the speed of the business, then I routinely argue we have to push those decisions to the business. So how do we get them the information that they need, and then how do we move into more of a governance role where we can make sure the right decisions are being made, and if they're not, we can figure out why and correct it. How do we start getting our heads and hands wrapped around where do we focus?
That's a great question. I'll tell you, the first place I think we should be focusing is measuring how quickly we can identify and respond to a breach. We're never going to prevent everything. We're never going to protect everything. We're never going to design every system in the world perfectly. What we can do is build competent teams that know how to monitor and assess and respond in reasonable amounts of time so that we're not dealing with years of existing compromise.
I love that.
I'm just going to say, so the average of 200 days needs to be shrunk somehow?
yeah, maybe 200 seconds would be ideal or closer to ideal. All right, 200 minutes. I think about it in terms of your house. I know how much we hate these analogues, but how long would you like to let somebody that you don't know that has criminal intent wander around your house?
Well, and a similar analog I've heard of that is, let's say you're having a party at your house, a big party, and there's a valet out front. Is someone going to potentially try to crash the party? Yeah. How long would you like them to be crashing your party before you figure it out and kick them out? And that's the thing, it plays to my bias. I think breaches are symptoms. I shudder every time somebody cries about the breach. The breach to me isn't the problem. We still have car accidents. People still break into houses. There's all sorts of actual crime that happens where the breach is not material. What's the problem is what they do with it. And I kind of look at it the same way. So yeah, to your point, Matt, 200 days, 279 days, whatever number we want. Yeah, that's way too long. But see, I think what happens is we keep looking at it as an industry, and this matters, by the way, whether you're in the enterprise today listening to this and you're looking at your innovative startups or you're in a startup. Every time somebody says we prevent breaches, I always look at that and go, yeah, but do you really? Like, seriously? Yeah. But if somebody started coming out and saying, look, we're going to get you better insight, we're better sensors, we're better alerts, right? And we got to be careful with that because we all don't want alerts. We keep talking about that too. But gosh, if I had actionable information faster and we could disrupt stuff before it became a problem, we uncovered it, we reacted to it, I think it's a much better strategy for it.
Yeah, it's that active protection promise that we've all talked about, right? If I have the data and I have the analytics and I trust it, that's part of the challenge here, I think, is trust still. But if I trust it, then let the machine take the action to mitigate the potential impact, right? We've talked about it for a long time. We're still not there. I still think it is one of those potential nirvana use cases, but how do you enable the machines to self-protect in some respects and let them do it and at least minimize the potential impact? But I still don't see we're there, though.
Well, every time we say that. Well, yeah, and I go back because I've been doing this. Well, we've all been doing this for a while, but in the 90s, we started to dabble with orchestration, and we started to dabble with self-writing rules and stuff, and it just turned out it was a really good way to create an automated denial service. You just shut people down faster, and so like every time we say, how do we let the machines protect themselves? There's a lot of nuance in that too, because then as soon as we start letting them do that, people are going to try to figure out, like, how long did it take people to corrupt chatbots? Like a day? And they took it all sorts of different ways. Jason, one of the things that you work on is, and it was kind of interesting because you talked about continuous validation, the cause system that you guys have that you're working on. And at first, I kind of looked at that with like continuous validation, and to me, that felt a little bit like continuous monitoring, which is interesting. I think, Matt, you and I talked about that at least a couple times now and looked at it. But But then when you talked about it more, one of the things that you said was, I'm going to help you measure the value of what you've currently got. How does that work? Because I'm just kind of curious, like, well, how it works.
It works at the simplest level. We deploy, or rather you come to us and deploy your security stack with your configurations. You manage it like you do the rest of your security. We deploy your gold image in our environment, and then we encounter the threats we know to be live and active right now on the internet. We encounter anywhere between 1 and 7 million URLs a day, for example, and monitor whether or not they're able to compromise the system. The value is whether or not your gold image with your security policy is delivering the value against live threats that you expect it to. And there is no end of reasons why you might not be blocking something, you might not be detecting something. But today it's a vacuum, it's a false negative in your environment. You can't safely go and counter the internet and all of its underbelly from your own systems in your own environment and do it in a way that scales and can orchestrate. That's the value we bring. I talk about it as peace of mind. Wouldn't you like to know that your security is delivering value against the threats you're reasonably going to face today?
It's providing a level of assurance, that's the term we used to use, that your systems and all the things that you've deployed are actually doing what you thought they were going to do, right? But you're doing it in a live environment to really provide some of that level of assurance to say, yeah, it's working. These things aren't working. Maybe if you tweak these. So I think that's a really interesting approach.
We think so too. It's proven effective so far in our other testing efforts. And I think it's got great value on the enterprise side.
When you're explaining this to somebody, I really like that peace of mind thing, especially too. One of the struggles that I see a lot of security leaders have today is that how do I go explain this to somebody? How do I explain what we're doing? If they ask me, where did you spend your money? What is or isn't working? That's a big challenge to them. It feels like you're giving them some support in that particular area. So when you're selling this to people, and I know that you're not on the front line of the sales, but when you're positioning something like this, are you selling the CISO on it, or is this a more complex sale because you're actually starting to cross over to some of those business units and say, you guys want to see how security's doing? Let me show you. Like where are you finding the sweet spot for this is getting traction right now?
The CISO, the CSO, the high level management within SOCs. It's interesting to get reactions. Some people see it as, oh, you're pointing out all the problems with what we're doing. Other people see it as you're giving me the peace of mind and enabling me to respond to the gaps. I would encourage you to see it as the ability to respond to the threat you're likely to face. If you look at threat intelligence, for example, you could spend a couple $100,000 and get a couple million different indicators. The real question is not how many things can be detected. The real question is how many of those things that can be detected are likely to have caused you a problem. And so you focus your efforts on those. And we're positioned to be able to help you understand which ones are likely to have caused you a problem so that you can go find them and hunt them down in your organization if they exist.
Now, so that's from the enterprise side. Are you getting interest in from the vendors themselves to like, hey, can you guys validate some of this? I think NSS Labs has done that in the past. I'm assuming there is value in kind of validating and creating some level of assurance that, yeah, your claims are actually real or they're not real. Kind of go button things up.
So on the vendor side, it's open to them to deploy their product in their default configurations in any of our test domains and have that available to the enterprise to see and even provide it to their prospects. I think having an independent party that says you are or are not responding to the threats that are live today and measuring how quickly, if there's a gap, you do respond is a good value, right? It's a good value on the vendor. It keeps your teams honest, make sure you're paying attention to the right things. Just like when the enterprise consumes your technology, it ensures that they're doing the right things for the threats they're reasonably going to face. And if they're not, providing them with real demonstrable, actionable things to go address.
Some wise advice for a few of these startups, right? As they come out, they're like, hey, is this really providing the value we think it's going to provide? Leveraging an independent lab like NSS, I think would be a good place to get some of that validation, at least understand it before you kind of roll it out to a broader audience.
It's interesting to me to see the different responses from vendors. Some vendors very much see it that way. Other vendors very much see it as a poke in the eye. I would encourage everyone to see it as an opportunity to understand the state of the industry and your competition and where your differentiation is, where your gaps are, and how to provide that value you want to claim. Talking about startups in our industry and new products and that kind of thing, I think everybody makes the bombastic claims that they solve all your problems. And then we talk about, my critical thinking. I have to ask the simple question. If we haven't improved the availability of talent and we haven't improved the baseline of engineering as it relates to cyber in the last 20 years, why do we think that we can go create a new company using the same people that created the problems in other technologies and solve them out of the gate?
Because you got to have hope, man. Don't take their hope away.
No, I learned a lot. Yeah.
It's look, it's a good question. I want to reiterate something that you've said too, and Matt's pushed on this a couple times. It's the mindset. A lot of times in security, we have such a negative mindset because we're always looking at the downside of risk, that we forget that there's an upside to risk. And in business, they're managing that risk on a curve, and they're trying to get to the right outcomes. So we look at a test and we go, oh, you're going to point out everything I did wrong. And it's like, coming home and scoring 96 and having your parents go, so you failed? I got a 96. Yes. So you got 4 wrong. So you failed. Yeah. And that's what we do in security. Or they'll look at it and they'll go, well, I got like 80%, so that's good, right? I don't know. What 20% did you get wrong, right? But to your point, when we get this, if our attitude on the testing, our attitude on working with independent labs and looking at value on stuff, as I've worked with more executives and boards, I've never had somebody say, yeah, those security guys totally blew it. They asked for budget, and then they actually measured it, and it didn't hit the ROI they promised me exactly. So screw them. I want them all fired. I've never seen that happen, ever. I guess if you're really egregious on it, but just so everybody understands, if you're actually on any side of this equation trying to measure something and use that as an input to make better decisions, people, they tend to respect that, because a lot of folks don't do that very well. So I think it's a really important mindset as we look at a lot of this stuff. All right, so you've been in the industry a long time. You and I have already touched on things like password policies, and if we fire me up on passwords, we'll be here all day. But victim shaming, taking a look at pen tests versus red teaming and stuff like that. If you were going to venture out today, or somebody's watching this right now, I'm kind of curious where you think either security leaders should be looking at startups to help them solve some of the problems that they've got, right? Where do we get some of that innovation that we need? Or if somebody wants to do a startup today, and they're going to go ahead and say, okay, but I'm not of the startup, or I'm not of the security shortage mentality, and I am different than everybody else, because of course that's what we're going to say. Where do you think we should focus? Either what excites you, what do you think is promising from a security perspective, or where do you think we need more focus in order to really start to turn the dial and make a difference?
If I talked at a high level about my pet peeve areas where I think we can make a huge improvement in security, I do hate victim shaming. They're a victim like everybody else when they're compromised. They didn't deserve to be compromised, right? The reality, though, is security becoming the water cooler, open, candid conversation that you can have with everybody, instead of the technology that stops you from doing what you want to do. There's a certain amount of just daily education and interaction you can have there that will improve the state of things greatly. When we talk about how we're doing security today, it tends to be deploy the next new technology to solve the next problem, and it gets forgotten, or operations move on, or there's a change or an acquisition. All of a sudden, there's this orphan technology, then everybody still thinks you're getting the value, but you've not solved the problem. I would say we need to measure whether or not what we're deploying is delivering on that value. We certainly have our approach. It's a very early approach on providing continuous validation of your technologies, but take pen tests and turn them, instead of highlights of the areas that you have risks and need to manage, turn them into red teaming, at least or a safer version of red teaming, and have your security teams respond. Measure how quickly it takes them to identify the presence of an adversary, and how quickly it takes to identify what risk they're presenting and what kind of steps need to be taken to get them out of your network. Password policies, get rid of them. adopt two-factor authentication and adopt it quickly, right? Password policies are just as bad as everything else in my mind, but don't do it with text messages. Text messaging is not two-factor authentication. And I could go on and on and on from there, but if we do just those simple things, we'll see a lot of progress.
Do you think that's why we've seen such an uptick lately in identity and authentication types of solutions? Matt and I have covered this a lot in the last month. I think it hasn't been a day go by we haven't talked about it. Jason, do you think that's what it is? Like, are people looking at that and saying, okay, what we have doesn't work, but I'm going to give you a better, easier way to do it? Or are you saying we don't even really need that? We just need to like take a deep breath and think about some of this differently.
We certainly need IAM technologies. The state of the art in account management and authorization and authentication is, it's just lacking. Let's leave it that way.
Got opportunity.
There's a lot of opportunity there. It's not, it's not the new hotness as far as, the press or whatever, but it is great value in being able to do that. But I'll tell you, I am not a fan of this biometric authentication and authorization movement we've got going on right now. You only have one face. You only have a few fingers. It's one thing to identify me with a high level of confidence. It's a different thing to use that as interpreted as my authorization to do something. So there's a fine line we're going to have to walk on that one. I'll tell you, the emergent space, besides continuous validation, right? I walk with my feet. I think there's an opportunity here, is hunting, right? I talk about red teaming. Concurrent with that, we should be hunting for active breaches within the environment. I'm not convinced that data analytics gets us there. The adversary is motivated. They know you log stuff. They take actions to ensure they have minimum footprints and indicators. I think actively pursuing and looking for criminals in your networks is important. So, those areas are important. I'm interested to see how identity plays out over time when you think about massive cloud scale delivered things like Facebook today. And the vast majority of people, at least in the US, that are coming up are going to have an online presence and account that through a group of people can be assured is you. And you can start to develop a trust and a rating and all of the things that go along with that. And do we ultimately get to a point where we're no longer doing authentication in enterprises? We're simply authorizing access for known entities and moving from there.
Getting rid of the multiple username password combinations and I am who I am and just either give me access or don't.
Yeah, there's the flip side of that, which is at that point you have a central entity that gets to determine whether or not you can or can't exist, right? We can get into all the conspiracy theories on that. But
unless you go like I have to admit I've been late to the game to embrace blockchain. For a long time I just like listened to it and went, oh, okay, cool. And now that I've actually started to look at it, I think there's a lot of places that sort of decentralized opportunity we maybe talked about 20 years ago but couldn't do. It starts to exist now. I think that's kind of exciting.
I think blockchain is still looking for a problem to properly solve.
Well, PKI is too, and so one of them is going to get it solved, or something else. And if not blockchain, it's what's interesting to me is there's a lot of lessons over the last 20 to 40 years that I don't know that we always slow down enough to listen to or to try to figure out. And so like even if we look at biometrics, a lot of people they just like the convenience of it, which I can appreciate. But as you're pointing out, we haven't really thought through any of the implications of it. And the difference between a calculated result of an algorithm and X number of biometric features versus an actual copy of your biometric, which is a very different situation. And so at some level, we have to be able to up-level some of these conversations. That means if you're a startup, you've got to think about how to educate the marketplace. And if you're looking at these types of things, you need to go search out people that don't just conform to your bias, but actually rail against it. And then start figuring out, I think, how to do some of this type of stuff a little bit differently or perhaps a little bit better.
Or at least how it fits into the model that you're talking about and whether it does or does not present opportunity for other technologies and other approaches, right? If you live too much in your echo chamber, you're going to have a big challenge. And we see that plenty in our space.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. I was actually just talking about some of that stuff this morning. So no, we'll get there. I like it. Let me ask one more question then, and then when you were talking about hunting and you were talking about analytics, and I tend to agree with you. One of the things that I've kind of felt is that UBA, user behavioral analytics and stuff, that almost becomes a feature set. Do you see that as augmenting hunting, replacing hunting? Do you see it as a feature, or do you see it as a standalone platform at some point? Like, where do you see a technology like UBA, or a concept, feature, however you want to describe it?
Yeah, I think it's nascent, certainly, and there's insight to be had there. Where we tend to over-rotate on things like UBA is we let the machines protect themselves, and in order to protect themselves, we back them off on some of the edge cases that exist in user behavior in general. Curious people do curious things, and sometimes people do stuff just to see what will happen, and that sends off all kinds of alarms. It heads you to the false positive hole. And in the end, I think we need to really be using these technologies and analytics not to find the bad, but to highlight the things that are most likely good so that we can put real talent on the things that might be bad, and apply the right resources in the right place. UBA would have a role there for sure. Do I think ultimately it's its own standalone category or becomes integrated? I mean, really, let's talk about where people authenticate and where you want to do the analytics, and then we'll talk about who owns that footprint, and that's probably where it needs to live.
It's really good insight. I love the
Guys.
idea. Well, and I love the idea of looking at the positives first and then figure out where to put the people. And, Matt, that's a trend that we're hearing a lot is go make it easier for people to do their jobs. Like, let's use the technology to offload some of these really inefficient manual tasks that we're doing, and let's let smart people go chase after cool things and things that excite us and let us go shine and make a little bit of a difference. Any other questions, Matt, from you for Jason?
And I think the only one I have is any startup that's out there, how would they engage with NSS Labs? Just let everybody know the best way to engage, because I think there is a need in the industry for some of these newer technologies to get some independent validation. So I would recommend they check out what NSS does from a validation perspective. So if you could, kind of point everybody that way. Yeah.
Not salesy. Go to nsslabs.com. We have a research portal where you can reach into. There's a lot of free resources there where you can learn about what we do. We publish all of our test methodologies. We do a lot of additional work beyond that to help companies understand their boundaries and growth and QA and all those things. If you think there's something that can be helpful and you want to engage, you can click one of those buttons and have somebody contact you. Certainly, it's pretty easy. Tweet us, find us in all the normal places.
Great.
It's fantastic. And you're right, Matt. I hope we see more people take advantage of that. Jason, thanks for joining us. Thanks for the good conversation. I'll post up the link, too, so people can read your thoughts on the security dogma and how to maybe move past it a little bit. And that wraps up this part of our conversation. Matt and I are going to be back after a short break to talk about startup articles, security notes of interest.